Mitsubishi says this Outlander plug-in hybrid really is rugged ready. And I have to say, it really does look the part, dude. So let's put that to the test. Let's tear this thing away from the trappings of civilization and take it way, way out here to the stark beauty of the Flinders Ranges and the endless busted ass scrub, which is much further in the outback than most Outlander plug-in hybrid owners would ever go. Like, dude, it's not Dingo Piss Creek, but if I'm not mistaken, I think I can smell it from here. I'm John Cadogan from AutoExpert.com.au. New cars cheap, Australia only, website, card. Should look at the road, really, shouldn't I? Why are we here? Why are we doing this? Well, I think it'd be fair to say that Mitsubishi Motors Australia had a series of intense discussions when I delivered my opinion about the Outback Adventure Australia readiness of this car, given that it comes out of the box, like out of the factory, with no spare tyre. And to me, that is the hugest red flag for Outback adventuring. Like, you got to have not one often, but duos spare tyres, right? So this is the most dignified response to a roast that I think I've ever experienced from a car company. They kind of said to me, we think the car's a lot better than that, and we want to address your concerns and equip this car for Outback adventuring, and then we want you to go and drive it on some pretty rough tracks in the Flinders Ranges. We'll come with you, and you can tell us what you think, because we think it's a lot better than that. And that's why we're here today. So headed off to the Flinders Ranges, nearly there, gonna drive on a whole bunch of rough tracks and just see what this fairly advanced powertrain can manage when we take it completely out of its native habitat. I'm kind of looking forward to that, and hey, it's going to be good or bad, and I'm going to be completely honest about it with you. And speaking of which, just to be totally upfront with you, here's the arrangement between me and Mitsubishi when it comes to doing this exercise. They're paying all the expenses, the accommodation, the flights. I don't have my hand in my pocket getting here. They're not paying for what I say, and they're not seeing what I say before you see it. It's going live without their imprimatur, and they can be happy with it or not happy with it, and hey, I'm going to live with that either way. Cutting right to the chase, here's the Outlander plug-in hybrid doing a bunch of stuff that most probably falls well outside the design brief. I'm going to leave it to you to decide how well it's going in the context of eco-friendly family SUVs, except to say that subjectively, it's a pretty stress-free driving experience. Below 70 kilometres an hour, this is an electric all-wheel drive train, and it's a pretty sophisticated one. I actually think the off-road ability on offer here is serendipitous mainly, like a happy accident.
I'm not surprised about the YouTube that you put out, because this car is built for the city, and riding it, you can experience how quiet it is. It's got some really good features. It's a great city car.
Sean Westcott is the boss of Mitsubishi in Australia. It's fair to say that he and I approached the purported rugged readiness of the Outlander plug-in from opposite ends of the playing field, mainly because he went out swimming well against the tide and quietly drove one across the Simpson Desert.
Now, we actually didn't do that publicly because I had no idea what the car's capability was. The car had just been launched. In fact, I took a PT car, which is a pre-production car, and was pleasantly surprised. And that actually led us to the Russell Quid campaign, because we realized that this car, in our opinion, in any event, is capable of doing things that most people wouldn't imagine.
Well, super all-wheel control is an interesting thing for me in this car, because it's, from that perspective, it's an electric drivetrain.
Yes.
Right? So it's one of the first times we've had the ability to electrically motively power the wheels, but
Yes.
at the same time have that kind of individual torque vectoring and all of the tech-based stuff that super all-wheel drive control does, right?
Yes, absolutely. And that, for me, was part of the surprise of the package.
Did you do it solo, like completely on your own? Like,
No.
I'm just taking this pre-production car and...
Yeah, so I would never advocate for anybody to do a trip across the Sims Desert solo.
Yeah.
That's just not the way to do it. So I did take 2 vehicles with me,
Yeah.
both of which were not the same car because we didn't know what this car's capability were. We understood the limitation of this car being ride-out. There were a few things that are patently obvious about a vehicle like this.
Well, like you're running a mad experiment, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I took a Pajero Sport and a Triton with, and initially I put the Pajero Sport up front and the Triton behind us as recovery vehicles in case we got stuck or something happened.
Sure.
Now, what is also interesting about the particular trip we did, well, we did it just after we'd had some very significant rain. So the Simpson wasn't only red sand.
Red mud.
It was it was red mud and black clay mud
Yeah,
and also
yeah.
salt pans.
Yeah, yeah.
So we tested more than the sand capability of this car. We actually tested the mud capability, and I'm hoping you'll see over the next 2 days that this car it surprised me as well. It was a very different driving experience, and I'm hoping you'll over the next 2 days get to drive this in off-road conditions.
The most interesting thing to me was that at times, in the more challenging all-terrain scenarios, the vehicle's drivetrain, which Mitsubishi calls super all-wheel control, was working and thinking quite hard. But I wasn't. It was pretty effortless for me.
100% electric at the moment, silent drive, and the beauty of this electric powertrain in this sort of driving condition is you've got 100% torque from standstill.
Yeah, it's kind of the opposite of combustion.
Yeah.
Tim Clark is Yoda. More specifically, Mitsubishi's Yoda of alternative powertrain technology in Australia. He's an engineer who lives and breathes this stuff.
It really kind of simulates what you would get with a low-range transfer case in a proper four-wheel drive, which is trying to give you a lot more torque with a much less wheel speed.
Yeah, but you need a lot of components to do that, right?
Yeah.
Like you need an extra gearbox
That's right.
for start and a clutch or torque converter, whatever. Something.
Well, yeah, it's a balancing act because we've got a battery to manage in
Yeah,
this car
yeah.
as well. But and the other thing with this is, we've got the 100% torque at zero and at very low speed, but we've also got strong regen braking for downhill applications. So effectively, you can drive the car off the throttle just by modulating the accelerator, which is really kind of useful in this kind of really low speed crawling over rock kind of driving conditions.
Yeah. Now,
How are you finding it?
it's a triumph of no effort.
It's effortless,
I don't
isn't
need any skill to do this. We're just following the tractor,
Yeah.
like that. And that's probably the biggest compliment I could pay the engineers who thought this all up. Because if you have to work hard, that's kind of a fail.
Yeah,
Right.
Yeah, I agree.
Getting into this car for the first time and really trying to drill down into the complexity of the drive system really is quite confronting, especially if you're doing it while you're rocketing through the scenery at like 28 meters a second, like 100 k's an hour. There's a lot of information, but once you become a little bit familiar with it, it is actually really easy to switch the modes from EV only to save or charge mode and all of that stuff. And I urge you, if you pick up a car like this, to get familiar with that, because it's a little bit like changing from, I don't know, Android to iOS or something. You do need to put in a significant amount of effort just to come to grips with the differences in order that you can drive it like a pro rather than just sit here and let it do everything for you. I don't know if you feel that way about technology, but I always feel like it's kind of better if I'm in charge, and guaranteed 15 minutes of intense playing around with the buttons while you're not rocketing through the scenery, you'll be playing it like a Stradivarius and it will all make sense.
Look at the versatility and the capability of this package in the Outlander especially. It can do so much just as it is, and it is perfect. It's a great family car in the city for daily commuting. It's a great family car for long distance commuting and travelling, and now we're discovering also how good it is in an off-road rock crawling scenario, which is kind of not what you'd expect, but the capability's there.
If you do manage to take the plug-in Outlander off-road challenge, right, just be aware that you're going to get into some situations where the wheel travel is not going to be enough to keep all the tyres on the deck at the same time. So the odd wheel is going to get airborne, and then the super all-wheel control system is going to have a big think. And that's going to take what seems like initially an eternity, particularly if you're under pressure. You know how stress works out and you feel like something that takes 2 seconds actually feels like it takes 10 minutes. It's a little bit like that if you've never been four-wheel driving before. So you get in this situation, you kind of stall on the grid, the car rocks diagonally typically because the front, say, right and the back left are in the air and the car's rocking over this axis. And the super all-wheel control system's going, I think I need to push the drive this way. And your job at this point is to do nothing, right? Just leave your foot where it was with a moderate throttle input and just wait for the system to figure it out. And when the drive shunts, you often just find that you've done nothing, car's been stationary for like 2 seconds, the drive is changed, like it's being driven to where there's traction, and the car just effortlessly proceeds through the obstacle where 2 seconds ago it felt like it wasn't going to make it. And it takes a while for the weakest link in the system, which could be you, it could certainly be me, you've got to catch up. If you're hazy about just how plug-in hybrids work, you are certainly not alone. You'll hear terms like series and parallel bandied about all the time, so we might as well try to demystify that. Series mode is where everything operates in a straight line from the engine to the wheels. The combustion engine drives the electrical system, which drives the wheels. Parallel mode is where the electrical system drives the wheels, but so does the combustion engine in parallel.
In series hybrid mode, in the Outlander and Eclipse Cross plug-in hybrid, that's if your battery state of charge gets to the point where it can no longer support pure battery electric driving, series hybrid mode will activate automatically.
Yeah.
And typically that happens when you get to around 15% state of charge. So there's a reserve kept within the battery to keep all systems operating. So there's about 15% left when that series mode kicks in. And the unique thing with the Outlander plug-in hybrid is that at every speed below 70 kilometers per hour, only the electric motors can drive the wheels, either in battery electric mode or series hybrid mode.
Right, so you're driving around town under 70, up to 70, whatever. It's only the electric motors moving you forward.
Yep, so from standstill to 70, it's only electric motors that can provide propulsion for the vehicle.
Right, so that could be in EV mode with just battery to motors, but it could also be with the combustion powertrain at the top of the tree sort of thing.
Yeah, in the series hybrid mode, that's right.
Yeah. Okay, so then parallel mode is open road driving, presumably.
That's right. Yeah, so parallel mode is not available below 70 kilometers per hour because of the single speed transaxle that connects all of these power systems together in the Outlander. So the single speed transaxle has only one fixed gear, and if you think about a manual car with a higher ratio, like a fourth or fifth gear,
yeah,
you can't take off from standstill, and that you'll bog down and you'll stall the engine.
Sure.
This car is set up so that only at high speeds will the internal combustion engine power the front wheels directly through that single speed transaxle. And the reason for that is because the electric powertrain is much more efficient at lower speeds than the internal combustion engine, and opposite at higher speeds.
So what is the mode of engagement for the combustion engine when it's driving the transaxle? How does it engage? Like, is it a clutch thing or
torque demand? Yeah, there's a hydraulic clutch that engages
automatically.
That engages automatically, usually based on torque demand, which is through pedal application. So
Yeah.
that light pedal application, it might just cruise along as a series hybrid at high speeds. And if you want to apply more, engage more torque for overtaking, for example, then it will provide direct drive to the front axle. The rear axle is electric driven only, so that parallel hybrid mode is, I guess in two senses, providing parallel drive, because it's providing direct drive to the front axle and electric drive to the rear axle, but also in parallel, whatever energy that's generated by the engine that isn't used for the front wheels, it's also harvesting to store in the battery for later use.
My principal objection to the rugged readiness of the Outlander plug-in is that not only does it lack a spare tyre, which was sacrificed owing to the demands of packaging for the hybrid system, but Mitsubishi does not offer one as an accessory or optional extra, together with a robust mounting option. But there's a reason for this, and I really don't think anyone is especially happy with it. A super interesting thing to me about car makers is how they might want to do something for you, for us, whatever, but their heads are stuck in a vice. Like, they operate in a box too, and the box has got rules, and I've drilled right down into the complexity of putting a spare tyre into this car, like as a factory retrofit kind of thing, or an accessory. And the reality is that for them to go through a program to do that, it would just be cost prohibitive to provide a solution as a sort of genuine accessory. So the reductio ad absurdum of that is that if you want to do this kind of adventuring, then preparing for it it's on you, right? So you've got to make a series of rational decisions about how you're going to stow an extra spare tyre, where's the jack going to go, you're going to carry a shovel, you're going to do all of that stuff, and you have to do it responsibly. Like, it can't just roll around in the back waiting to be a projectile when Isaac Newton's laws reach through at the worst possible time and just throw it at you because your frame of reference took a wrong turn at friggin' Albuquerque.
I would also say, just on the Outback adventure side of things, we would never advocate for anybody to go into Outback without the necessary experience, without the necessary equipment, without doing their homework, without doing their research, without carrying. I personally, whether it's a Pajero Sport or whether it's a Triton, I never venture off with less than 2, sometimes 3 spare wheels, depending where I'm going.
Absolutely.
I always carry water, I always carry fuel.
Sat phone, so important.
Absolutely, carry sat phones.
Obviously, if you're going to take a car like this or any soft roader to an environment like this, you have to upgrade it. But with this car, the battery is actually between the wheels, but there's a big electric motor just here where a spare tyre would normally be under the cargo bay floor. So you have to do a few modifications and carry a few things if you want to do this safely and responsibly. Number one, spare tyre contained in the compartment by a cargo barrier. That's so important, and also strapped down, because that stops it effectively becoming a missile if you have to stop in a real hurry. So that's so important. We've also got a shovel, but one of the things you might not have considered is that cars that come standard out of the factory without a spare tyre also don't have a jack or a wheelbase. So you're going to have to upgrade to that as well. Shovel, always such a nice thing to have if you get stuck, because that can cover a multitude of sins in the recovery environment that you might be in. A little bit of judicious digging and jacking goes a hell of a long way. And on the issue of a jack, even if you've got a car with a spare tyre, the standard jack is probably inadequate for most four-wheel drive recovery type situations where you might be on some dodgy terrain and have to jack up a wheel that's got nothing under it. So the other thing that's really important, I think, is a fire extinguisher, because you never know when you might need one of those, and it's super dry out here. So it's a disaster if you lose your vehicle, right? If you lose your vehicle because there's a grass fire or something like that nearby, not only do you not have shelter, but you don't have communication anymore, and you don't have essentially any support. Your first aid kit might go up in smoke, literally. And the other thing, obviously, the place for the petrol, if you're carrying spare petrol, is on the roof, because petrol evaporates to form an explosive vapor mixture in air that every temperature above minus 43 degrees C. You don't want that happening inside the cabin. You want it up there on the roof, and it's got to be secure. So if you've got all of that sorted out, this is kind of the impact on your cargo bay. You know, the stuff that you're going to carry, your bags and your personal effects and stuff like that are going to be about that impacted. So you still do have some space, but obviously for a family of 5, this could be pretty tight. For mum and dad, you've got a whole back seat to put your stuff in. So happy days. I like the way they've done this. They've got the cargo barrier and the spare is strapped down. The other one on the roof, super hard to get to, like very difficult to climb up there. Not that safe to be up there in the middle of frickin' nowhere. You're not going to be parked on a billiard table, are you? You're going to be at an angle, so it's a slopey surface. And P.S., a spare wheel and tyre for this version of plug-in Outlander on the 20-inch rims is like 30 kilos, which is 66 pounds. And for most people, picking up a 66 pound / 30 kilo thing, snatching it up overhead and throwing it onto a roof rack, basically where your wrists are fully extended, that's one step too far, I think, for the average person. So if you do carry a second spare on the roof, you're going to have to think about, well, what if I need to use it? Am I going to get its replacement, like the dud tyre that's got a big hole in it? Am I going to get that back up there, or am I going to have to figure out how to carry it to a place or a facility where I can get it repaired and the other one put back up there? Because I'm pretty sure I could snatch a 66 pound barbell like easy, but when you're talking about a tyre, it doesn't have a handle and the weight is out here, right? And I wouldn't be fucking around with a barbell next to a car. You know what I mean? If you fumble the tyre, if you don't give yourself a hernia, you could drop it on the car and do, I don't know, more than $1,000 worth of panel beating kind of damage. Whatever you do in this situation, you're going to need to do it in an informed way after taking into account the remoteness and support options in the environment in which you'll be operating. Another unintended consequence of being in this car in the boonies is how easy it is to reinflate the tyres. Because if you're in a conventional combustion car with a 12-volt electric system, then you're kind of limited to how much electrical grunt you can drag out of that. And all of the 12-volt compressors that I've ever used pay homage to that limitation. They're really not that good, and you're not going to get anything like as much energy out of them, power, whatever, as you would if you had 240 volts. This car has an inverter, and it's got a GPO in the cargo bay, and that GPO will deliver 1500 watts. And I was watching the dudes check the tyre pressures on the Pajero Sport, and they used the Outlander to pump it up because it was just better at that. It's got a 1500 watt inverter and the compressor's 1100 watts. Okay, 1100 watts in a 12 volt system would be like 90 something amps. You need a cable thicker than my thumb to do that, right? And you'd be able to weld with it. Whereas you can just whip down to Bunnings and get the compressor that these guys are using, like an 1100 watt Azito compressor, and you reinflate the tyre in half the time that it would take the overwhelming majority of 12 volt four-wheel drive specific compressors to do the job. So I guess the big question is the Outlander plug-in hybrid rugged ready? I'd say no. Not the way you drive it off the showroom floor anyway, but as you've seen from the vehicle tackling the Flinders Ranges, it's a pretty robust platform which you can easily make ready. But if that was your objective, would you not just buy some hardcore 4x4? When you're out in this kind of environment, invariably you see just jacked up four-wheel drives. You see Ranges, Hiluxes, 200 series, 300 series, lots of caravans, and many of those four-wheel drives have had the full pimp, you know, that ARB, you know, that someone spent $5,000 to $10,000 notionally attempting to make those four-wheel drives better and occasionally succeeding. But it strikes me that if you are not aspiring to be a member of that club, and you know the club I'm talking about, like Club Blue Singlet, okay? If you're just a family who wants to see the outback, who wants to do a little bit of family level adventuring, then this car will do that easily, and it's optimized for most of the driving you do. Like, if you get 4 weeks annual leave a year and you do adventuring for those 4 weeks, then you're spending 92 or 93, whatever it is, % of your driving life back in the city. And this car is optimized for that, but it will do the adventuring, counterintuitively enough. And that is it mangles my headspace, because I see all of these jacked up four-wheel drives and there's families inside them and they're doing 95 whatever % of their driving back in the city. And those cars are terrible at that. They're terrible. They feel awful to drive. Mud tyres even feel terrible out here. Like, we're loping along at 100 Ks on a piece of highway and it's quiet. It's easy for me to talk to you, right? It's not like that in a jacked up SUV, jacked up Hilux, whatever. It's very unpleasant to drive at highway speeds with those big knobbly tyres, and the roll centre is way up here, and if a kangaroo hops out, it's a big deal to get around it without hitting it, whereas you get the good dynamics. So even when you're adventuring, you're in transit a lot of the time. You might drive for 6, 8, 10 hours from a city to a place like this, like the Flinders Ranges is 5 hours via the most direct route from Adelaide. And what are you going to do for most of that time? You're going to be sitting here like this at 100 Ks an hour. And I don't know about you, but if you don't want to join the club and wear your blue singlet and your stupid hat with the crocodile teeth in it, if you just want to take your family adventuring, you can do that in this car, and it's optimized for this kind of driving at 100 Ks an hour, but also optimized for the overwhelming majority of the driving that you actually do. Don't get me wrong, dude, I'm not for a moment suggesting that this car is an alternative to a hardcore four-wheel drive, because clearly it is not. If you want to drive through rivers up to here or something of that nature, endlessly thrash a car through really soft sand, then this is probably not the car for that. You know what I mean? But if you just want to go adventuring as a family, this car will take you places where you're going to feel particularly challenged. And certainly if you've never done it before, you'll feel out of your depth. Obviously, all cars have limits, and you need to be aware of the limits, and that's why some level of driver training, like off-road driver training, would be an excellent idea before you come out to an environment like this, just so you've got some idea of where the boundaries are. Like, don't step over this line, dude, kind of thing. And the other thing is, this car's obviously got limits, and the limits are the tyres. These are highway spec tyres. They've got good grip levels on the highway here, so that's nice if you have to swerve around some wildlife, for example, or stop in a hurry because something unexpected happened ahead. That's great. But if you want to go off-road, you might want to just upgrade a little bit to an all-terrain kind of tyre if you want to do this kind of thing regularly. And the other thing to appreciate is that clearance is going to be an issue. You're going to keep scraping the tow bar at the back, and because there's a battery between the wheels and a lot of other relatively low-hanging fruit, you're just not going to be able to drive over the kinds of obstacles that, you know, a four-wheel drive with this much clearance is going to get over, because you're not going to be able to do that. I've spent about 8 or 10 hours now driving around gravel roads in the Flinders Ranges, and more than just moderate four-wheel drive tracks, like nothing that you need a jacked up Hilux to do, and only a jacked up Hilux or Ranger or something will do it. But frankly, I've been shocked at 2 things with this car. Number 1 is what it will actually do, and number 2 is how easy it is to do that, and what an asset the all-wheel drivetrain has been. The electric all-wheel drivetrain is just so suited to this sort of moderate four-wheel driving, and I think that's taken me by surprise, and not just me. I think it's taken the dudes from Mitsubishi by surprise as well. Like, obviously this car is oriented at urban environments, you know, driving in urban environments, driving in EV mode to the office and back and things of that nature. But when you actually do get it out here and you've got a wheel up in the air and the super all-wheel control has a think about where it needs to shunt the drive, it does a pretty good job at that. And likewise, when you've got it in sort of broken, rough terrain, the ability to put drive down, like electric only drive down, you get a lot of torque with very little effort at sort of zero speed. And it's extremely suited to walking a car like this, maybe a little bit out of its depth, but easily through some of these four-wheel drive tracks on ridge tops in the Flinders Ranges. It does steep descents okay, and all things of this nature. And like I say, I was expecting it to be a lot worse than that, and I've driven a lot of soft roaders in environments like this, and they've been much more disappointing. Having been here now outside the Outlander plug-in's comfort zone for a couple of days, I'd have to say I'm not sure we really tested its capabilities, because it's a lot more capable than I thought it was. And I'd be quite comfortable doing this on my own, adequately equipped with the jack and the spare, etc. Of course, in the corporate world, you don't get to do it that way. You have to have a cast of thousands, which is exactly what we've got here today. We've got a CEO and two executives, the tech guy, a paramedic, and Mitch standing there getting sunburn behind the camera, making all the pretty pictures happen. So anyway, thanks for joining me out here in the Flinders with the Outlander plug-in hybrid. I hope you've got as much out of this report as I did.